Thank you, Stephanie. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank the Scientific Advisory Committee for the opportunity to present this research. As Stephanie mentioned, I'll be speaking about the relationship between socioeconomic marginalization and viral suppression among ART-exposed individuals who use illicit drugs. As most people in the room will be aware, there's a growing body of literature that looks at leakage from the cascade of care, and these efforts are geared towards identifying factors and processes that inhibit treatment, prevention efforts. And I think of particular importance in this area are factors that are amenable to policy and programmatic intervention that can better promote retention and care, heart adherence, and ultimately virologic suppression. And this growing body of work has, particularly in relation to ART adherence and plasma viral load suppression, identified a range of individual and social and structural determinants of these outcomes. An emerging line of inquiry in this area is the role of employment in seek, test, treat, and retain outcomes. And conceptually here, the idea is that employment provides access to material resources, stability, social contact outside the home, routinized activity, all things which promote engagement in retention and care, and adherence to medication regimes. And the International Labour Organization recently released, late last year, a review and meta-analysis of 23 different studies that examine the relationship between employment and adherence, which found that employed people living with HIV/AIDS are 39% more likely to achieve optimal ART adherence versus unemployed individuals. These benefits were attributed predominantly to improvements in financial and food and financial security, so material security, as well as medical service access that is linked to employment. It also identified some ongoing challenges related to confidentiality and workplace discrimination, as well as high barriers to employment, particularly among key affected populations. I really want to emphasize that employment is only part of a broader income generation picture, particularly among people living with HIV/AIDS who use illicit drugs. And we know that people living with HIV/AIDS and people who use illicit drugs have poorer labor market outcomes than individuals in the general population, particularly employment cessation following infection and diagnosis, which in some instances reaches up to 50% following the month of diagnosis. We also know that most people who use illicit drugs are employed, but individuals who engage in high-intensity use or polysubstance use have higher rates of unemployment than people that don't. And in the absence of, facing income insecurity and in the absence of viable, licit economic opportunities, people living with HIV/AIDS who use drugs often turn to other forms of income generation in order to address their income insecurity. So these are things, illegal activities like theft or drug dealing, might be street-based income generation, such as informal recycling, window washing, or panhandling, as well as sex work and other related activities. What we don't know, however, is the degree to which these activities impact HIV-related treatment and virologic outcomes. And so we undertook this study in order to really describe the magnitude of the engagement in these kinds of activities, to examine their associations with plasma viral load, and to determine the degree to which their impact on antiretroviral adherence mediates this relationship. And for this study, we defined prohibited and illegal income generation to include sex work, illegal activities such as drug dealing and theft, as well as street-based activities such as recycling, panhandling, or window washing. These analyses used the AIDS care cohort to evaluate access to survival service study data. The study is an open prospective cohort of people living with HIV/AIDS who use illicit drugs that's been ongoing here in Vancouver since 1996. And at baseline and semi-annually thereafter, participants complete interviewer-administered questionnaires and blood samples for serologic analysis. This data is then linked to individuals' complete retrospective and prospective HIV clinical profiles that includes all plasma and ART dispensation records from the centralized provincial treatment provider located at the BC Centre for Excellence in HIV/AIDS. And for this study, we used generalized mixed effects models with a standardized model selection procedure to adjust for known and hypothesized confounders. And those analyses examined the relationship between income generation, prohibited income generation, and viral suppression. And then we conducted subsequent mediation analyses that examined the role of adherence in that relationship. Moving on to results. This slide just provides a brief overview of the sample characteristics and an income generation profile of our sample. The study period was between December 2005 and May 2013, and it included 687 eligible participants who provided 4,713 observations. Of these, approximately 35% were women, approximately 56% were Caucasian, and the graph on the right shows the proportion of the study sample reporting income from any of the listed income generation activities per follow-up. And I think what's important to note here is the preponderance of individuals receiving social assistance, but also that if you add everything all together, you get a proportion greater than 1, and that's because most people in this context are generating income from more than one source. So you might have someone who receives social assistance and also supplements that with informal recycling, for example. I've also listed the income sources for any point over the course of the study observation period. It follows a similar pattern, and really want to emphasize that for this analysis, what's important is that most of the study population reported illegal or prohibited income generating activity at some point during the study period. This table outlines the results of our mixed effects analyses looking at the relationship between prohibited income generation and a plasma viral load of less than 50 copies per millimeter. And what's important here is that a very strong negative association that we identified in bivariate analyses between prohibited income generation and virologic suppression was retained in multivariate analysis after controlling for age, homelessness, high-intensity drug use, and ART adherence. Subsequent mediation analyses identified a significant negative impact, negative association between prohibited income generation and ART adherence, so that tells us that engagement in those prohibited activities does have an impact on adherence. It also identified a relationship between adherence and having a plasma viral load of less than 50 copies per millimeter. But despite this strong mediation effect, prohibited income generation retained a significant relationship with plasma viral load. So what does this tell us? I think this research complements existing work on employment and ART to really examine other forms of income generation and their role in treatment as prevention-related treatment and clinical outcomes. What we showed here was significant involvement in illegal and prohibited income generation among people living with HIV/AIDS as an indicator of socioeconomic marginalization. And this activity had both direct and indirect links to viral suppression. So these results suggest that ongoing socioeconomic marginalization negatively impact the health of people living with HIV/AIDS who use illicit drugs. And it's important to emphasize how this socioeconomic marginalization is entrenched through, among other things, the criminalization of drug use, as well as exacerbated by predominant sort of chronic income insecurity and a lack of viable illicit employment opportunities. And I think this research really points to a need for programmatic and policy interventions to promote income security among these populations, as well as identifying a place for low threshold employment, so employment that is able to accommodate health and social service utilization, changes in drug use patterns, episodic absences from labor market participation. I'd really like to close by acknowledging the contribution of our study participants, co-investigators, and the research team at the BC Centre for Excellence in HIV/AIDS, as well as study investigator support. Thank you.